Welcome to On Defense and Security, a podcast that examines domestic and international defense and military affairs. Through conversations, we will bridge the gap between academic research and policy and provide a platform for informed discussions, enabling our listeners to better understand critical issues.
Hello, everyone. My name's Dr. Christian Breede. I'm a remote fellow with the Center for International Defense Policy here at Queen's University, and currently a research analyst with the Department of National Defense working on leadership and professional concepts development. I'm thrilled today to be joined by Major General Greg Smith. And in fact, it's a bit of a reunion for the two of us because General Smith was a few years ago a visiting defense fellow here at the center. And that's where I first met him, even though he is an officer of the Royal Canadian Regiment, like I was before I retired. And so you'd think our paths would have crossed beforehand, but they haven't. Even though according to his biography, he served in all 3 battalions, which is pretty impressive at pretty much all the levels of command, including in the Special Operations Command, which is, again, a very impressive biography. I'm certainly not going to do it justice, but to give you a bit of a sense of who General Smith is, he was born and raised in Oshawa, Ontario, and like I said, has served in all 3 infantry battalions, and has then served in a variety of senior staff appointments around the world, most notably with the Land Component Command and Operation Inherent Resolve in 2016, amongst others as well. And like I said, we're thrilled to have him give his time today to talk to us about some very important concepts revolving around the Indo-Pacific strategy that the Government of Canada just recently released. And I think it's going to be a fascinating conversation. So General Smith, please, if I've made any mistakes in your bio or left anything egregious out, please correct me. And 2, I really look forward to having this conversation, doing a deep dive into something that I think is both fascinating and incredibly important.
Yeah, no, great to see you again, Christian, and thank you for this opportunity. As you said, this is a bit of a homecoming. I was fortunate enough to work as a visiting defense fellow coming back from Iraq in December 2016. Then the Professor Stephanie von Lackady was happy enough to take me in and go, yeah, sure, come on in. But it wasn't like free stuff. It was like, okay, so what are you doing? Like, you don't just get to hang out here and bask in the academic excellence. You're going to have to contribute. And so we had a discussion about what I was going to study. I got some of it done, published a bit of stuff because of it, but equally got to meet and hang out with a lot of great people in Queens. So I really appreciated that time, gave me some time to think, which is a bit of a luxury sometimes. And therefore really happy to have this conversation. Equally, I'm coming to the end of my current job here, which is Director General International Security Policy. We can talk about policy later if you want. What the hell does that mean? But it's, to equally talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy, which came out in November of 2022. So a few months after I took over this job. And so I've been able to watch it for the last 2.5 years, and happy to make some comments on it. And equally how, from a defense perspective, things are going well, where things could potentially change. Really, hey, anywhere else, I'm responsible for the world pretty much. So if there's any other parts you want to touch on, very happy to talk about that.
Okay, awesome. Well, if you don't mind, actually, we were talking before we started recording about some of the areas we want to cover, and this one is a bit of a fastball. But I think given your time at the CIDP and the distance between 2017 and so when you were with us, I'd love to just get your take on, in hindsight now, where you are today. How did you find that time with us? What was it like in terms of that? You said the opportunity to stop and think, which I think you're absolutely right. And it's a refrain I hear frequently from past VDFs, that opportunity to reflect is invaluable. I'm just curious how you look back on that period in your career.
Yeah, and I don't think it's unique to the military. I think I'm a bit of a podcast geek, and I listen to a number of podcasts where equally they talk about the intellectual equity with which you come into the job is what you get. Now, that's an American podcast, and you may be well aware that the American system is different than ours. Here in defense, we just switch defense ministers. And indeed, that doesn't mean I get fired. Versus I work with the Americans. I'm down in Washington from time to time. And my equivalent is what's called a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Major General level, roughly speaking. And they all get fired. Like, that's just the way it works. Which equally, there's a benefit. Now, number one, they get that. Nobody's terribly emotional about it. They knew it was a short-term gig. They come in, work as hard as they can, try to contribute to American defense and security. And then they know they're going back to business, academia, think tanks, and they're very used to that. That is an advantage, and this is where I connect back to CIDP being somewhat of a think tank, to have a moment to think and maybe even plan what's next. Now, I didn't totally know what was next, but it did allow me to reflect on my time in Iraq, and I was there for whatever it was, 10-ish months, fighting against the Islamic State at the time, and just to make some reflections that normally, who's got time to sit down and plunk away at a keyboard for however many weeks that takes to really reflect on. And I did some journaling over there and just kind of, that's funny. I never expected to see that. And I used some of that to actually put my thoughts down. So it was really, really useful to actually hopefully contribute in some way to have people go, well, when are we going to ever fight something like the Islamic State ever again? Never say never.
That's right.
It would allow me to do that. And, maybe somebody used that article to line the bottom of their birdcage, or maybe it was like genuinely they learned from it. And maybe they put that, as we say in the military, put that thought in their rucksack for later so that they could use it again. But to go back to this more institutional thing, and again, not unique to defense, not unique to the military, to genuinely have some time and reflect and think about what you're doing, what's the profession, etc. I found that invaluable. And of course, sitting outside, Kingston's a town with lots of military in it, but still to sit outside and have people from time to time just go, why do you think that way? Like that's, I don't understand why you'd even say that from perspective. That's really, really useful. And anytime you get through reading, podcast listening, or personal reflection to develop perspective, I think that's tremendously important, because trust me, there's a lot more going on than here in defense, not to channel Shakespeare too much, but there's a lot more in heaven and earth than what's going on in my military mind that's happening in the world. And you need to understand that and see that.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. I'm glad to hear that, because that's certainly the intention behind the program, and also the value you bring. Yeah, we would always characterize the visiting defense fellows in a lot of ways as being sort of the color commentators to the work we were doing in academia, because you bring that authenticity and that experience that then helps us better inform our research, which I think is really important. And then, of course, you do your own research on top of that. And as one colleague characterized it, when you have that combination of experience and academic expertise, you become downright dangerous in a really good way.
Well, and Christian, if I could just kind of riff off that for two things.
Sure.
Number one is the idea that, it's not like the military's got all the right solutions, and then you need to speak to some of your defense and security experts and then propose you things which are clearly academic and therefore naive. And then if you're really open about it, go, well, why not?
Exactly.
They know what they're talking about. Like, that's entirely possible. Let me think about that more than just dismiss it as something that's in the ivory tower of academia and thus never implementable. And then the second thing, and this was a couple of years before that, every once in a while they send us military folks off to school to get less dumb. And I did the national security program at the Canadian Forces College in Toronto. And probably made the mistake of doing another master's. I was trying to collect the whole bunch. And I did a rather large thesis under Dr. Barbara Folk, who was a very broad-minded lady and academic. And I did Canadian national power. So hard power, soft power. Let's respect the fact that Dr. Joseph Nye passed away recently at the time of recording. But I used his framework and kind of looked at it and used such thinkers as Michel Foucault for what's the basis of power, areas that I've never been involved in, but it allowed me ultimately to look at Canada as a power in the world. And I know it's not what we Canadians think about ourselves, but we're actually a very big, powerful country, both from a hard power and a soft power, one based on reputation and leadership and credibility. We're a really big deal. And I experienced that in NATO, where we Canadians tend to look at our boots and kind of scuff the ground. We're not a big deal. And that's not how the Europeans see us. And, we're not the United States. We're not Germany. We're not France, the UK. But then you start getting into Canadian territory there of population, geography, economy, military. So if you sit there and go, well, Canada's just a small country, they'll look at you and go sorry, you're telling Latvia that Canada's a small country. No, you're not. And stop thinking that way. So I found that ability to reflect, and I reflect. It was like a 128-page paper, which I'm sure for some of you is not that much, but it was 128 pages, including a bunch of conversations with some very important people about what is Canada in the world. that to this day, and in this current job as Director General of International Security Policy, I think about. I think about and I act that way. And I know, militarily, we don't spend as much money. See how that changes in the next little while. But we tend not to think of ourselves as a big deal in Canada. And yet the world does think we're a big deal. And so therefore, if we talk about NATO, the Indo-Pacific, whatever next, Canada is not a small power, and we're capable of doing a lot.
That's awesome. That's one of the, so all I was thinking as you were saying this about, Canada being a big deal, I had some natural skepticism to what you were saying. And we sometimes hear this boosterism, right? This, Canada's awesome. Canada's great. We punch above our weight, right? That was a common refrain. Certainly when I was in uniform, we heard that a lot. But I got to tell you, how you had just explained it makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. You think of 190 some countries, we're 30 million. That puts us in a top sort of quadrant of those countries, and that is a big deal. We are a large country. We're a middle power, but that is still something worth note. I think you're absolutely right. We do sometimes sell ourselves far too short. And what I'd love to do is take that as an opportunity to segue into the Indo-Pacific strategy that you referenced earlier. And, having reviewed it and looked at it myself, I was really heartened to see the whole of government approach embodied in that strategy, which I thought was really, really interesting. And especially given the complexity of the region, I think that makes a lot of sense. And the complexity of the defense and security challenges therein, this makes a lot of sense. But what I'd love to get from your perspective is, how is the military's role evolving? And has it in your mind expanded beyond simply providing, the potential for lethal effect in that region? What else are we looking at doing?
Yeah, Christian, again, thank you for that. And let me just describe a little bit about the Indo-Pacific strategy, which, like I said, came out in November of 2022. So we're past 2.5 years old. And of course, it has multiple lines of effort, and I'll continue to use that term, which include the people-to-people connections and economic and green things. And there's defense and security portion of that. And so within those different lines of effort, and again, I think you're quite right to characterize it as a whole of government approach. And so therefore, defense must contribute within that framework. And we have 5 lines of effort to do so. And I'll just quickly go through those, which are 3 warships a year into the Indo-Pacific. Happy to talk about that because I get to see their good work all the time. Exercises, and not uniquely naval, but Army, Navy, Air Force, cyberspace, special operations forces. A lot of being out there and being seen as Canadians and participating. Third is what we call capacity building. Some might be aware of the Director of Military and Training Cooperation, which has worked around the world to work with different militaries, and we call it capacity building. In the Indo-Pacific, I tend to, and I acted as a salesman, if you will. When I go and visit, I think I counted recently, I had something like 15 trips there in 3.5 years to go and coordinate. You can't just say, hey, we're doing an Indo-Pacific strategy and don't show up. You need to show up to the meetings. You need to meet your equivalents, tell them what you're doing. And part of this was my salesmanship of capacity building, this third line of effort under the defense side. And I called it partnership because there's some very sophisticated militaries in the Indo-Pacific. And I found it almost a conceited concept, if not a colonial concept, of I will help you build your capacities, as opposed to saying, we're talking about some pretty sophisticated militaries here, and I'd happy cooperate with you and share skill sets and see how we can do that. And if you want to go to another country, and this could be talking to a Japan or a Republic of Korea, if you want to go to another country and women, peace and security, peacekeeping stuff, mine clearance, whatever you want, you got something you'd like us to do together, I'm game to do that. I'll take it back through the Strategic Joint Staff. I'll talk to the Canadian Armed Forces, and we'll see what we can do together. But I'm here to work with you, and that builds our capacity together. And I called it partnership rather than I'm here to bestow upon you my great capacities, because that's not really how I saw it working. So that was the first 3. Fourth, we put policy officers into the region. And you might say, what the hell's a policy officer? These are people that I get to work with now, tremendously smart. They understand what Canada's doing. They report back. They go to meetings. They just represent Canada. And so we've done that. We've got a person in Tokyo, another one in Singapore, another one in Canberra. And you might say the third one should be in another place. Well, actually, it's the lady is in Washington in the Pentagon working in their Indo-Pacific team. We were thinking initially Hawaii. For those that know the Indo-Pacific Command, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command's there. In the end, we heard from the Pentagon, could you send that person to more of a strategic level into the Pentagon? Fair enough. So we did that. But that builds the connections. And indeed, we've had that lady that works in the Pentagon attend some very high-level meetings, hanging out with her American boss. And that's what a great way to hear things, report back if necessary, but just be there and contribute. And then the last line of effort is cyber. We have a little bit of money to do some cyber activities. And again, to kick the ground for a second and speak not much of Canada, we're actually very good at cyber, particularly defensive cyber. We are actually very, very capable. Canada, or the Canadian Armed Forces, stood up a cyber command a couple of months ago. And it's a lot of business outside of just doing its normal business. It has gone into the Indo-Pacific. It does some work in Latvia and does some great work on the defensive side. And so all those lines of effort are how we contribute to the Indo-Pacific strategy. And if you think we are coordinating that daily here in Ottawa, I don't really think that's how it works. It's more of a embassy level thing. And I'll be quite frank, like, ambassadors are thrilled when there is a port visit. When there is a ship visit into a port, that is not a ship, a gray hull that slides into the dock. That is Canada that shows up. And they use that for trade and the community connections. And as you know, there are a lot of Canadians that bring their heritage back to the region, and that connects things. And so I genuinely have been welcome with open arms. I always go to the embassy first, talk to the defense attaché, talk to the ambassador, before I go and start saying crazy stuff in this capital. And they're thrilled. They're thrilled with how we enable them. And again, frankly, that's where they coordinate those different lines of effort across trade versus people to people and defense. And I think it works very well.
Yeah. Fascinating again. So it sounds like what you're doing, even at the most strategic level and almost that interface between strategy and politics, you're dealing with people. You know, it's working with individuals and building those relationships. And I love the shift from capacity building to just partnerships. I think that's phenomenal. I think that, you know, again, sort of playing on the stereotypes of Canada, this is a good one. This is that humility, that stereotypical Canadian humility of, you know, let's just work together. And I think that's really, really interesting to hear that approach. And it sounds like it's paying off in terms of getting access and building those relationships that are going to see results. One of the other things I thought I want to do a little deeper dive on is, in the strategy, there seemed to be a tremendous amount of emphasis upon the idea of deterrence. And I'm wondering if you would be able to speak a bit to what that looks like from a CAF perspective in the region. Like, what is it that the Canadian Armed Forces can offer in terms of building that deterrent capability? And you mentioned a few capabilities like the cyber and our ships. And I'm wondering what that kind of looks like from in your perspective when we talk about, you know, deterrence, and what is it we are deterring? What are we trying to achieve there from that perspective?
Yeah, no, thanks, Christian. And not to get all up in deterrence theory, because I'm not the expert on that, but, you know, denial versus punishment. I would characterize this as deterrence by denial in the sense of, let me take a step back. I would characterize, again, we characterize this Indo-Pacific strategy as a whole of government one, but I would characterize it as a competition strategy. So there is, if you go to the Indo-Pacific, I'll give you a bumper sticker. It's basically China brings all kinds of economic benefit to the countries of the Indo-Pacific, and America brings security. Don't make us decide. Like, don't make us say, I'm with America, because then I lose on the economic side. And China, don't tell me, you want to do business with us, ignore America. Nobody wants to have to choose. They're all balancing. And we could sit there and put a spectrum of countries from like Vietnam, Cambodia, that are communist countries. I've visited them both. Happy to have Canadians there. They're communist regimes. They're close to China versus, I don't know, Philippines. Hardcore with America, really happy to have them there. And everybody else is somewhere on that spectrum. And they are balancing those two big powers in the region. And so again, that strategy, the Indo-Pacific strategy, I would characterize it as a competition strategy versus crisis and conflict. Those cool people out there that, like, you know, have a copy of the Indo-Pacific warfighting strategy. I don't, you shouldn't. it's a warfighting strategy, and that is not the Indo-Pacific strategy. It's online. Please download it, take a look at it. It's available, and you'll see that this is just us being present in the Indo-Pacific. And so part of that is we have national interest to do so. Something like 6 of the top 13 economies in the world are in the Indo-Pacific, and Canada wants to do business with them. There's like 20% of the Canadian population that draws its ethnic heritage back to the region, Indo-Pacific. Why would we not do more there? So we have national interests that draw us to the region. But outside of that, and I know we don't use the term rules-based international order so much anymore because the U.S., which was the creator or the supervisor, whatever, of the rules-based international order, doesn't believe in it to the same degree as they used to. But going back to the idea of deterrence, by us being there, by us being present, helping different partners to have better militaries, but showing that we're there. Like, you just can't do whatever you want because Canada's got military forces in the region. And let me use an example of Taiwan. So we do regular Taiwan Strait transits. That's just the best way for those that know the geography of the region to go from Southeast Asia to Northeast Asia. Just the best way to go is go through the Taiwan Strait. That usually involves me having a discussion with the Chinese defense attaché here in town. A démarche is the fancy way of saying, hey, we don't like what you're doing, or we want to talk about this. And for those of you that are married, I call like the equivalent of diplomacy is how you just day to day, that's just being married. You talk every day. When your spouse goes, we need to talk, that's a démarche. So that allows me to talk to the Chinese defense attaché. Yeah. He's a good partner. We've been working a lot over 3.5 years. And we have a functional defense relationship. We didn't when we started, we do now. But again, to go back to the story of by doing those Taiwan Strait transits, we have a regular demonstration that peace across the Taiwan Strait is important to Canada. That any type of change of status violently is in no one's interest, and we're there to help demonstrate that regularly. And I'll tell you, maybe less China, they're very, very happy we're in the region. I hear that all the time when I'm there. Our ambassadors send back, like, that's great stuff. And quite frankly, other than the U.S., we are the country that does it the most. And we have thrown it open to anybody. You want to do bilateral straight transit with us? We'll do it. Indeed, we'll tell you our lessons learned. And then, I'm an Army guy, but the Navy folks talk to the Navy folks and say, okay, here's what you should expect. Here's how we do it. We pass that to all kinds of countries. And we've done it to like Australia, Germany, and they've done their own. Great. They've done it unilaterally. It's cool. But we've equally said, you want to do that bilaterally? To us, it's a demonstration of the international community, demonstrating deterrence, demonstrating that we don't want things to change violently. And therefore, this competition, it's great. Competitions happen all the time, sports, other things, but they don't happen violently. And therefore, Canada is a believer in that peaceful activity.
Yeah, that's a great way of framing it. And I hadn't thought of it before that way in terms of, it is almost like it's viewed as a zero-sum game in terms of you either pick China or the U.S. And I think this notion of navigating that middle ground and working with both and finding those points of common interest and emphasizing that, I think is critical. It's almost like Canada's, again, playing to our stereotype almost of being the interlocutor between two great powers. I think that's really our strong suit. And the notion of the competition strategy I like as well. I think it's very, very important and a great way to frame it. If this fails, then we end up in a shooting war. And that's the whole point of the strategy, is to prevent that. So in many ways, the essence of the strategy is deterrence. It's like, let's do this so that we don't end up in a shooting war. I think that's amazing. Would you imagine working with some allies and some maybe unconventional allies like Vietnam, Cambodia? What are some of the interoperability challenges you faced? Any of those that you feel comfortable speaking to? We're familiar with working with the New Zealand Defence Force, the Australian Defence Force, but again, it's those less conventional allies and partners in that region that I'd be curious about how that works from an interoperability standpoint.
Well, like Kristen, you'd understand the challenge of that. Like even, so fighting an infantry company with a forward observation officer, artillery, tanks, so you have armored forces, maybe you're really getting some good resources. So you got fast air, like that's a lot of work. Like this is like catnip to us infantry officers, but like that is difficult. That takes a lot of coordination. The Combat Training Center in Gagetown practices that stuff, and people fail because it's hard. And so now take the next step and do it with a bunch of different nations. And sorry, we just talked Army stuff. I didn't talk joint, like in the sense of bringing Navy and cyber and SOF and all. Anyway, so start doing that across nations. Well, we're doing that in Latvia right now. Like, I think the current count is there's 13 nations overall in the multinational brigade Latvia. And it's happening. And part of it is the stereotype. And I'm not going to sit here and flex on my master's thesis again about stereotypes about Canada. We can collaborate well. Maybe it's because, you know, Canada's a winter country. It's an Arctic nation. And if you didn't get along, they kicked you out of the cabin and you froze to death. I don't know. Maybe that's the ancestral reason for that. But we collaborate well. And so we're doing it great in Latvia. And that takes work. The Canadian style of leadership is indeed a thing. And that takes work. Like a marriage, I keep going back to that analogy, you got to work at the relationship. If you just think you're going to show up at weddings and birthdays, well, that's not how relationships work. You got to be there every day working on it. And so they do that in Latvia. Now, meanwhile, the Indo-Pacific, like I said, I've been to some 10 countries, I think, over the years. And I think other than China, I say that facetiously, because again, the Chinese defense attaché and then, quite frankly, the ambassador here in Ottawa have been good partners to make sure that we are maintaining proper military-to-military relations. But other than China, I think everybody says more Canada, please. You go to the Philippines, they're like, this is awesome. Can you be here more often? You work with Japan. I was talking to my Japanese colleague just yesterday. Wait, let's do more. Republic of Korea, they want to do stuff together. So like of all those nations, I've never been to a place that said, you know, we kind of have enough Canada these days. Maybe you can come back later. They want us to show up and do things. But again, there is a challenge to that. Now, Five Eyes, everybody will know that's Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. Like we've been doing this for, well, it's back to the late World War II, intelligence sharing, and we've continued. We've leveraged off that to do things, share lessons learned, tactics, techniques, procedures. We can work fairly well together. And, you know, English is all more or less the same language. That's actually a thing. Having been in a few countries where if you don't speak the language, you're not going to understand. English is actually tremendously important, and the common cultural heritage of how we do things actually matters. So Five Eyes, I think we can do that pretty well. In fact, not that long ago, we had one of our frigates rearm in Australia, went to an Australian port and rearmed there, showing that degree of interoperability.
Wow.
Like that's not like tactical level, that's more higher level. But that it demonstrates like here we know how to handle that stuff. You know, we have done all the coordination logistically to make that happen. Then you start getting into the tougher stuff. We've been doing things more recently with the Philippines. Philippines is under extensive pressure. And I've been at meetings where they're pounding the table and saying, this is not about we can all get along. Like we are under heavy, heavy pressure from the Chinese Coast Guard and what they would call the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. We're under heavy pressure. And like, I'm not just going to sit here and glad hand this. This is like, we need help. And so when we work with the Philippines doing like multinational maritime cooperative activities or other things, they are genuinely really happy. Their English is excellent. It works pretty well. You start going into some other countries, like my Vietnamese is not very good, really rusty. It takes a genuine effort to do that. Same thing in Japan. For those of you who've been there, beautiful country, 120 million people. It's tremendously Japanese. Not a lot of people speak English. And so if you think you're just going to show up there and go, hi, I'm from Canada and I speak English and French, you better have a plan that's a bit more deeper than that. So that is genuinely a thing. And it's been reinforced me on some of my recent visits. If you don't culturally understand it, and we have different cultures. Cultures are like an accent. Like, you know, you can go to, I've been to Belgium recently, and in French, they go, oh, hold it. You're Canadian. You have an accent. And you're like, well, I think you have an accent. That's a culture. You don't realize you have an accent until you go to another country, and then they help tell you that. You don't realize you have a culture until you go to another country, and they say, why does your defense do it that way? You're like, well, I really thought about it. That's just what we do. So you've got to work through that. And whether it's the Philippines or Indonesia or any of the other countries in the region, you've got to work at it. You've got to spend time building those people-to-people connections so you understand how each other work. And then quite frankly, like I said, if English is not their first language or a close second language, you're going to have to work on how are we going to communicate effectively.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it speaks to the importance of relationships. And I love the example that you gave about the Five Eyes. And I recall my own experiences working in that area with that alliance, trying to do interoperability. And even there, it's challenging, even with those similarities. So again, I can only imagine with unconventional allies and new allies and emerging partners, it would be even more so. So thanks for that. So in your testimony you gave back in January 2024 to the National Defense Committee, you talked about how the CAF capabilities in the region are more than just naval, and certainly appreciate that. And we'll talk about that in a second. But I do want to dwell on the naval capabilities because we are dealing with the Pacific Ocean. It is primarily the playground of the Navy, and I want to nerd out a little bit if we can. What's your take on the emerging capabilities, and how big a deal is the River class frigate that we're embarking upon? Is this going to be a significant step forward? Is this more of the same, or how is this going to help on that particular angle in terms of boosting our naval capabilities in the Pacific?
Yes. So my naval nerdology is somewhat limited, unfortunately, because I am
As is mine.
Although I am a increasingly a joint officer, and equally one that kind of works across. Like I actually technically work for the defense minister through the deputy minister. Like I don't work in the CAF, so I've learned a lot on the public servant side. But I'll do my best to do nerd out on the Navy side. So just before I do, I mean, and if this is included in the recording, great. If not, it's just an interesting comment, which is I have had the opportunity, indeed, I'd say the honor, to testify before a parliamentary committee. And the deputy minister is particularly good. And I think this is perhaps useful for some of the people that listen to this podcast, which is it is an honor to go before elected officials and tell them what you do.
Yeah,
and I've had at least one deputy minister say that, like, this young person is a honor to go there. So don't run up the clock. Don't waste the time of the committee. Answer them the best you can. Now, sometimes those committees can get a little bit political, and trust me, I'm not going to say anything to a committee that I haven't told my minister first. But you genuinely try to tell them and answer their questions, because not everybody does defense all the time. There's people on that committee that do it because they want to know about defense and security, but they genuinely have questions, and you try to do the very best you can answer. And I think it's a very important thing to work in government and to do the best you can to answer what elected officials want to know. Meanwhile, on your specific question, so like right now, as everybody knows, we have the Halifax class frigate. Old. It's getting up there. Now it gets regular upgrades, and I'm not the right guy to talk about procurement and midlife upgrades, but it's old. And it's capable of certain things in the region. From a competition, if I go back to my analogy that I think the Indo-Pacific strategy is a competition strategy, it's fine. And if we don't limit ourselves to frigates, there are new Arctic offshore and patrol vessels that could equally do things in the region. That's fine too. They're capable of that. If it's a full-up war fighting type thing, those are older capabilities that will not fare as well. And like, you just have to watch what's going on around the world, and it's not surprising. If you got into a car race and somebody's got like a 50-year-old vehicle and somebody's got a much more new one, well, one's probably going to generally operate the better. And that makes light a bit of the fact that this is talking about killing and about war. And it's tremendously dangerous. And we wouldn't want to send young Canadian women and men into harm's way with less than full, like most modern equipment possible. The River class, and I don't know a lot about it, but I do know it employs the new Aegis system and the ability to do ballistic missile defense and have cutting edge integrated air and missile defense is tremendously important. And that's not a huge, shocking statement. If you look around the world and the type of fighting that's occurring in Ukraine with drones and cruise missiles and ballistic missiles used conventionally, if you look at what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea and against Israel, like, that is cutting edge stuff. And if you don't show up with the right ability to conduct operations there, you are putting yourself in tremendous risk. And so the River class, and it's not coming in for a while. It's still going to take a while. I'm actually not sure if they've cut steel on the hull yet, but it's getting close. It's going to take a while before they're available and operationally ready. But that will take us to a new ability. If I, again, go across those different types of strategies, that can be make us more prepared to do so. But in the meantime, to execute the Indo-Pacific strategy, I think we are quite capable, and not uniquely from a naval perspective, but Army, Air, Cyber, Special Operations Forces, Space, I think we are quite credible. And it comes down to the great men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces that are quite capable. and equally culturally quite capable of showing up and saying, listen, colleague from the Indo-Pacific, fellow teammate, I'm just going to show you what I do. I'm not saying it's the right way, but it's how we do it. And if that helps you, great. If it doesn't, I will, call home because I haven't heard from you in a while, but I'm here to volunteer you what I've got. And it's the young warriors, the young Canadian women and men that I think are really the capability that we show up to in the Indo-Pacific and that deliver Canada to that region.
Yeah, it's like how you spoke earlier about the importance of relationships, right? And that relationship building can happen regardless of the environment in which you're operating. And I think that's an important point as well. And it kind of leads to my last question here, which is, returning to the other arms. And you did allude to it already, but I'm wondering if we could do a little deeper dive in terms of any specific capabilities that the Army and the Air Force and even Special Operations Forces would bring to the Indo-Pacific that'd be particularly useful to enable the competition strategy that we're trying to develop, and then also prepare for that worst case scenario of should this competition fail and we find ourselves in a kinetic fight.
So I'll go back to the idea that we show up in the region, we do exercises, and we do partnership together. And so again, that just builds the relationship so that we can, if that ever had to happen, we had to operate together. It's not me saying, hi, you've never met me before. My name's Greg. Let's go fighting. You've worked together. Hopefully you've done some exercises together and you know how each other operates, and linguistically and culturally, when I say this, that's what I mean. And so you do that beforehand. Like if you have to build a team on day of the emergency, that's a bad plan. You need to cooperate beforehand. You need to see how each other's equipment works. And so that's what we're seeing. Obviously, from a maritime perspective, I talked about that. From a Navy perspective, but equally, Army, there's some exercises we're doing in there. Army, again, very focused on Latvia, but they're doing some business as well in the Indo-Pacific. Air Force, definitely participating in some things. The Air Force is going through a fundamental, I think, what's the cool people say, recapitalization of equipment right now, between fighters, P-8 patrol aircraft, C-330s, other types of aircraft and airframes. That is a lot. They are focusing on that. It is a big deal of not just getting, hey, it's a new piece of equipment, great, let's get in and drive, but having everybody that operates on that aircraft trained to the new aircraft. And how about the maintainers and the people that support it? It's a big, big deal. So the Air Force is tremendously linked into that. SOF, we don't talk about it very much, but there's a lot of opportunities with fellow SOF operators around the region to practice together. Our CAN-SOF is world-class, not just withstanding their sort of their heritage, but equally from years of war in Afghanistan, activities in Iraq, some of which are in the media. They are world-class. And then again, to practice with special operations forces around the region that are very good, but don't have the same experiences is very, very valued. Cyber, I talked about that earlier, we're actually very good at. Particularly from a defensive perspective, there's people that want to sit there and do exercises with us and listen and learn. And frankly, I think we learn stuff back as well. And so those are all just different aspects, and people like me that are in the policy world help build those connections. But equally, to think a little bit more higher level from a diplomatic perspective, getting people together is great. But at the same time, you need to enable that with defense cooperation agreements, maybe other types of agreements to make sure that, soldiers sometimes have some time off, sometimes they go downtown, sometimes they have a few too many drinks, sometimes they get in fights, and sometimes suddenly somebody finds himself with the attention of local law enforcement. You kind of need to go through that and prepare, here's how we're going to handle that before that actually happens. And that's sort of the diplomatic world. That's sort of part of the policy work I do to say, hey, this is what we're going to cooperate together on. And indeed, if we're going to have intelligence professionals speak together, this is the level that we can work at and we can share information. And that all sounds hopefully not tremendously boring to the people of CIDP and the listeners, but that is equally very important to go out there and get that paperwork done. And it takes a lot of negotiation to say, what degree are we going to allow? And then ultimately I'll enable those war fighters to go out there and practice so that someday, and I'll bring it back to the hook about deterrence and competition, so that we practice it beforehand. So somebody's watching the world and going, ooh, those two countries are really good together. It might not be the right place to apply more pressure because they're actually very good. And if anything really bad happens, they can work together and they've demonstrated. And so that is ultimately deterrence, but it's enabled by that entire defense team.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point, and it's one I think that maybe often gets overlooked is the importance of signaling in deterrence, right? And we always think about, military capabilities and what we do and how we work together as, we want to, not necessarily clandestine, but we don't want to publicize it, right? Because it's capabilities. We don't want to reveal state secrets and things like that. But at the same time, it's really good for potential adversaries to know what we're capable of. So they do exactly that. So we become that check on maybe some adventurism that they're considering. And I think that's a key piece. And so it's that signaling mechanism. It's saying, hey, look how well we work together. Look what we can do. Look what we're capable of. And maybe they'll look elsewhere.
And Christian, if I can just kind of rip off that a little bit more.
Yeah, for sure.
And back to the sort of the beginning of the conversation about Canada is actually a fairly big, powerful country in the world. And, generally we have a good reputation. Canada's something I saw in my last 3 years in NATO. We were involved in World War I, World War II. We actually liberated a great deal of Belgium, quite a bit of the Netherlands. We have a very good reputation, if you will. We have a very clean history in that sense. And there are things in our history we've got to do better on, the treatment of Indigenous peoples. There's a number of things, but like genuinely, the world looks at Canada and goes, I'd like to work with Canada. Like, it's not something, oh yeah, Canada. No, they genuinely want to work with us. And if a big, powerful country with a good reputation, with good soft power is seen practicing with another nation in the Indo-Pacific, is that not a good thing for deterrence to go, wow, that Canada is working actively with that country. They're trying to make sure they can interop, perhaps improve each other's capabilities. Yeah. Again, maybe this is not the day to go and mess around in that region because we're not talking to one country. We're now kind of getting into the business of more than one country, including Canada.
Yeah. And it's far cheaper to do it that way.
Yep.
I would think. All right. Well, Major General Smith, I appreciate your time. I know it's precious, and I think we're kind of coming full time here with our discussion. I'd love to give you the last word. If there's anything else that you really want to get out, that any points you want to emphasize. I think this is a fascinating conversation on a topic that doesn't get as much attention, I think, perhaps as it ought.
Yeah, Christian, thank you for the opportunity. Again, my part of my heart is with CIDP because I did some time there. Enjoyed my time in Kingston. It wasn't very long, unfortunately, when I was working at the Canadian Army Command and Staff College. And actually, I put a daughter through Queen's too. So, yep, that happened. So all that to say is, I really think it's a great thing you're doing with a podcast. I mean, we Canadians, we could get into a discussion about strategic culture another time, don't genuinely think about defense and security that much because we're in this wonderful nation that has like the Atlantic, Pacific, the Arctic, and generally a friendly superpower to our south. And so, discussions like I've had with other nations where I think grandparents bounce their grandkids on their knee and say, you need to protect your country or else. Like there are countries' history of like, there's a part of the family that doesn't exist anymore because they were killed in war. We don't have that. So we don't think about this, but it's important. The risk of it not being well understood and well researched and well studied is severe. And so CIDP, this podcast, the people that are listening, I salute you. I think it's tremendously important. And like, trust me, I'm not here as a paid announcement, but like Canadian Armed Forces, we got jobs. There's a tremendous amount. We're rebuilding. We're doing great. We're all growing in size. And as I talk about everything that you and I just said, like, you want to be part of that? You want to visit the world? It's there for you. And equally, I'd be wrong if I did not flex a bit for my policy officer colleagues. If you're more into a person that likes to work in Ottawa, I have worked with some tremendous public servant colleagues. There's a policy officer recruitment program. If you're smart, you got a postgrad, hopefully some linguistic skills, like apply. They do tremendous work. I've learned so much from them. And that's what helps make Canada the great, powerful country it is. My next job is back to NATO. And I look forward to continuing to support what Canada's going to do in the world because, unfortunately, world continues to prove to be a little bit risky out there. And so everything I just said, I think job security, unfortunately, is looking pretty solid right now.
Yeah, I agree. There's many ways to serve, and I think that's a great way to close this discussion. So thanks for the kind words, General Smith, and all the best. Stay safe. And I look forward to crossing paths again soon.
Till next time, Christian.
All righty. Take care.
Thank you.